We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
Some puzzling new developments tonight in the ongoing search for Nancy Guthrie.
Day 85. That's how long it had been since Nancy Guthrie vanished. Nearly 80 days with no confirmed sightings, no direct contact, and no proof she was even alive. And just when the case started to feel like it was slipping into silence, something unexpected surfaced. Not a phone call, not a letter, not even a message through official channels. It appeared inside a Bitcoin wallet. One short line, "We are ready to talk." And what happened after that may explain why everything suddenly went quiet. Nancy didn't disappear from a street or a parking lot. She vanished from inside her own home. An 84-year-old woman in Tucson, gone without a clear trace. No obvious struggle, no forced entry that told a simple story. Just absence. By this point, the question wasn't only where she was. It was whether she was still out there at all. Then came the ransom letters. 2 of them, sent to local TV stations. And unlike many cases where messages like that are quickly dismissed, these weren't ignored. They were taken seriously enough that investigators followed them to a digital trail, a Bitcoin wallet. That alone was unusual. Real ransom cases usually rely on controlled, private communication. This one unfolded in public. Then on February 10th, there was activity. A small transaction, not a payment, but a signal. Alongside it, a message, "We are ready to talk. Contact us." No one officially confirmed who sent it, but based on how these situations are handled, it likely came from investigators or someone acting on behalf of the family. That moment mattered, because it marked a shift. It wasn't just a demand anymore. It was the start of a negotiation. But negotiations like this aren't straightforward. They're not about simply responding to demands. They're about control. Because the moment one side appears desperate, the balance shifts. And in cases like this, that balance can determine everything. The people behind the message may believe they hold all the leverage. But investigators see it differently. If there's no cooperation, there's no reward. And just like that, both sides are locked in a standoff. Then came the silence. No reply, no follow-up, no proof of life. Nothing. And that absence became one of the most important details in the entire case. Because silence, in this context, doesn't just mean inactivity. It means something didn't go the way it was expected to. From the family's perspective, the urge to act would be overwhelming. To send another message, to push forward, to try anything that might bring a response. But investigators don't move on emotion. They move on patterns. And something about this pattern didn't fit. Because real kidnappers, if money is the goal, follow a predictable path. They apply pressure. They provide proof the victim is alive. They maintain contact. None of that happened here. Which raises a difficult possibility. What if this was never really about ransom? That question shifted the direction of the investigation. Because once you step away from the idea of money as the motive, you're left with something else. The person behind it. Their behavior, their decisions, their intent. Profilers began looking at the case through that lens. Not speculation, but patterns drawn from years of similar cases. And one statistic stood out. The vast majority of victims are harmed by someone they know. Not necessarily someone close, but someone familiar. Someone who had enough awareness to understand their routine, their environment, their vulnerabilities. That changes the scope entirely. Because someone they know doesn't just mean family or friends. It can include anyone who had repeated exposure. A worker, a visitor, someone who crossed paths often enough to observe without being noticed. And then there was the way the crime was carried out. It didn't suggest hesitation. It suggested confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from either experience or fixation. Someone who believed they could do this without being stopped. At the same time, the ransom element started to feel out of place. Not just unusual, but almost disconnected from the rest of the behavior. Public messages, no proof of life, no follow-through. It began to look less like a failed negotiation and more like something added later. A layer meant to redirect attention. And that brings up another possibility. If the ransom wasn't genuine, then it wasn't a goal. It was a tool. Something designed to shape how the crime was perceived. Because when you look at how it was handled, one detail stands out more than anything else. It was made public. Intentionally. And that's not how real ransom situations usually work. They rely on privacy, control, limited exposure. This did the opposite. So why make it visible? Why involve media instead of keeping communication direct? That decision carries weight. Because it suggests the attention itself may have been part of the objective. And if attention was the goal, then the question becomes, attention for who? That's where the focus begins to shift beyond Nancy herself. Because sometimes the person at the center of a crime isn't the true target. Sometimes they are the connection. And in this case, there is a connection that can't be ignored. Someone visible. Someone recognizable. Someone whose life extends far beyond a private circle. When investigators consider that angle, a different kind of motive enters the picture. Not financial, but personal. Not random, but directed. The kind of motive that forms over time, built on perception rather than reality. Because exposure changes things. It brings admiration, but it also brings attention from people who feel connected without ever being known. Most of the time, that remains harmless. But occasionally, it doesn't. Sometimes that attention evolves. It becomes focused. Emotional. And in rare cases, it turns into something more intense. Something that leads to action. If that's part of this case, then the act itself may not have been about negotiation at all. It may have been about making a statement. And if that's true, then the silence that followed isn't confusion. It's completion. Because a message, once delivered, doesn't always need a response. But even with that theory, there are still unanswered questions. The biggest one being motive. Because every action, no matter how complex, serves a purpose. Even if that purpose isn't obvious. Investigators keep coming back to one question: who benefits? Not just financially, but in any real way. Because when someone disappears, their absence changes things. And somewhere in that shift, there could be a motive. At the same time, evidence matters more than theory. In this case, one detail stood out: a single strand of hair. Small, easy to miss, but it proves someone else may have been there. And if it belongs to the right person, it could change everything. That strand is now being tested using advanced methods, the kind that can uncover connections even without a direct match. If it leads to a name, the case shifts from guessing to knowing. But even now, there's still silence. No contact, no follow-up, nothing. And that silence might be the biggest clue of all. Because it suggests this wasn't interrupted, it may have already been completed. Which brings it all back to one question. What really happened to Nancy Guthrie?